What's up, traders? Matt from the Trade Brigade here doing an earnings roundup, okay? So this is a little bit different of a format. We're going to try it out today. We're going to stuff every single company that had earnings after the bell, at least the noteworthy ones, into this one video here today. Kicking things off, of course, on Nvidia, probably the biggest name of them all to report today. On the left-hand side, not much has changed. We still have the daily time frame, and of course, on the right-hand side, the 30-minute intraday time frame. So that being said, in the after hours, what's going on with the number? Just quite a bit of volatility. You can see that we had an overnight high way up here closer to 276 and an overnight low way down below closer to 250.75. It's not abundantly clear whether or not we will open on a gap up or a gap down. We're currently trading towards the lows of today's session right now. So do keep in mind a lot can happen between now and 9:30, but I think the play is fairly straightforward here. If we take a closer look at the daily time frame chart, notice how we have two equal highs back to back. It's going to make the long trade pretty simple if we can take out those highs, basically this 266 area from today's session and yesterday's session. The target is the overnight high, which is at 276 we called it. So that's the upside play. And notice that it is above this area of prior support, which now may act as resistance. Okay, so be aware of that, but the overnight high should be the target on this move, given that's where we went when the earnings release came out. Okay, so that's what we've got to the upside. If we take out the two-day highs, to the downside, it's not necessarily a short underneath today's low, but instead I would want to see what the reaction is closer to 240. The expected move on the earnings announcement here was somewhere close or in the neighborhood of $20, and if we're coming from 260 roughly down to 240, that is the expected move. I would almost expect a little bit of a dead cat bounce off of that area, and then we'll reassess, right? Does it roll over? Do we have a lower high? And then can we flush that 240? Target would be the gap. Or do we work our way once again into the resistance trend line coming from the daily time frame? So as of right now, that's what I've got for you, just simply based on being in range. We don't really have gap rules in play, so it's not worth discussing. Let's continue along. The next one to report was FSR. Oops, SR, there we go. Had that backwards. And this, of course, is Fisker. We don't have any daily structure in place here, so let's quickly just give ourselves a roadmap. Big sets of lows in there, lows here. This was a bit of a breakout point, fake break right here to here, but nonetheless, we're still trading above that area. To the left, notice the lack of structure in here until we get into this prior support closer to 1526. So with that in play, let's go ahead and zoom in on the 30-minute where the earnings release actually came out. Just a lot of volatility. Again, big move higher, but most of it retraced and just kind of hovering sideways as of right now. Now, keep in mind, with any of these companies, a lot can happen between now and 9:30, but the gap fill and the gap trade here is not that attractive. There's the forecasted open, there's the overnight high. Here is today's high of day. If we take a look at this on the daily time frame chart, you're not going to look for the gap and trap, which is essentially a failure to take out the high, trade short through the open to fill the gap to here. I mean, that's terrible risk reward. To say that's your risk and this is your reward, we'll just put an RW down here for reward. It doesn't make sense at all, right? So this is not something I would look to apply gap rules to. The only scenario where you would sort of apply gap rules would be, okay, if this is a gap and go, the target, just like Nvidia, is going to be the overnight high, which is roughly 1450. Okay, so that's the only thing that we're going to sort of look for here on any gap fill. So if it fills the gap, supports, and then trades back higher through the high of day, maybe that's the setup to take, but I wouldn't be looking for the gap and trap on the opening print here inside of Fisker. Next up, we're going to take a look at MTTR. So MTTR, there we go. That's Matterport. Zooming in on this one. Full disclosure here, I hold this in a long-term account. Obviously, it's not doing so hot. I was fortunate enough to pick it up in here, so it's not like I'm long from the highs, but nonetheless, still not looking hot, right? New lows. Let's zoom in anyways. Let's clear the drawing set. We're going to start from scratch and clearly gapping down on earnings, okay? So we basically just want to know where the flush point is on the daily. We want to know where the overnight low is. We want to know where the forecasted opening print is, and that's basically it, right? That's a pretty good example of, or not example, but that's a pretty easy map here on Matterport to be following. So on this one, because the size of the reward and the risk are essentially equal, we will apply gap rules. So number one, as always, is the gap and trap, and that looks like this. Opening here, failing to take out the overnight low, basically not finding any new sellers there. You look for a long back up through the open to close the gap to this flush point, okay? So that would be 768 from 7, a 68-cent move on something that's sub $10 right now. Probably worth watching for, right? Probably not the most attractive thing in the world, but definitely worth watching for. So that's what we've got to the upside if it wants to give us the gap and trap. And once we get here, that's where you're going to look for gap fill reversals, right? It would also be a bit of a break and retest if we roll over here for another equal low, continuing on our merry way in the downtrend. So that's the sort of up and downside case in that scenario. The flip side of this coin, scenario number two, is just the gap and go, meaning that we opened here, bear flag acceptance, price acceptance down below, just above the overnight high, could look like a descending triangle as well, something that looks like this. A breakdown there, as we know, basically brings us into new all-time lows inside of Matterport. If I pop this back on auto, notice that we have no support underneath us. You're basically just not going to be fishing for bottoms there. You're going to essentially just be patient, okay? There's no reason to be trying to stab long at these levels without any sort of structure to trade against. So I would just be patient, look for whole and half dollars to potentially act as support and resistance, but nothing concrete is down there. So that's Matterport. Next up, we have Dash for Doordash. So D, there we go, Dash, there we go. Struggling to type. My keyboard is behind my microphone, just as an FYI. Anyways, not like that matters. Let's clear up the drawing set. Let's give ourselves that quick daily roadmap. There's your area of support. Just like in Matterport, it is going to act as a flush point, but I'm sure you can already see off to my right, big green gap up candle, right? It's very likely that we'll open on some sort of gap up for tomorrow's session around 120. So let's go ahead and throw that in as the forecasted opening print. The overnight high is way up there, closer to 130, 150s, and today's high of day is way underneath, around 100, right? So what this does is set up, again, the gap and trap scenario. So if we open here, fail to find new buyers this time, up and over the overnight high, trade short, back down through the open, to close the gap down to 100. Now, would I look for something like that on this? Absolutely. If you think about what the daily trend is, it is firmly down, okay? And we're gapping up in a huge downtrend. So to me, this is an excuse for anyone who's long from up in here, if they don't really believe in the company, to sell for either less of a loss or potentially break even if they were trying to time this bottom in here when there's a bit of a turn to the upside. So to me, yeah, this is definitely a candidate for the gap and trap into tomorrow's session. Will it fill the whole gap? Will it fill a halfway? I'm not entirely sure of that, but I would look for a little bit of downside here inside of Dash if we can take out that opening print and not take out the overnight high, right? Exactly the framework that we just discussed. Scenario number 2, the gap and go. Not really as likely in my estimation given the daily downtrend, but if we can put in some sort of acceptance up here, breaks of the overnight high take us to the next daily resistance, which I would start to map out if I scrunch this up. There's really two areas I'm seeing. This is underneath, so that's not really going to do it. But this is kind of that next area, and I'm splitting the difference between these lows and then resistance in here. Obviously, this candle was above, but resistance in there as well. So 143.35 is that next level to the upside. And given that it's an earnings day, maybe that's on the table. It's a little bit of a stretch for what we would consider an average range inside of Doordash. But given, again, that it's earnings, we've already seen a nice gap up in the post-market. Maybe it's in the cards, okay? So those are the levels and scenarios, primarily looking for lower on the gap and trap inside of Doordash based on the daily downtrend, okay? Next up, what do we have here? It's going to be QS for QuantumScape. Zooming in, let's actually just clear the drawing set here. None of those levels are really important. Zooming back in a little bit here. So pressure cooker top was on the daily around 1750s. You'll notice that, we could also do something like this. Let's get that a click. There we go. So support trend line in play, ascending triangle basically, right? If we take a look at the 30-minute intraday time frame chart and the after hours session, again, a lot of volatility. However, this one is happening to land a little bit lower, okay? So we do want to know where that forecasted open is, the overnight low, the whole 9 yards, the same thing that we've been looking at in most of these tickers so far. Let's take a look on the daily time frame chart just to sort of eliminate, I'll actually leave that on. So if we open here, fail to take out the overnight low, find new sellers there, nothing happens, look for higher to fill the gap. Now, is that going to be a likely scenario? I'm not overly convinced because it would be a break of the support trend line, basically giving us a lower low on the daily, right? As long as, and this would probably be the level that you would want to pay attention to, as long as that level breaks at 1585, it's probably not a trade for higher inside of QuantumScape, noting that these people are now not feeling so great about their position and they could close out for a loss, adding some selling pressure, taking us closer to the lows around 14. So this one, I would start to be a little bit more careful of this set of lows, not necessarily the opening print, and also the support trend line, right? So 1565 is the number to watch out for in QuantumScape. If we can hold up above, maybe there's a rotation to fill the gap, right? But if we take it out and move to the downside, it doesn't really matter as long as we resist there on any sort of back tests. That to me is confirming that all of these people are overhead supply and we should rotate lower into that 14 area of lows that we pointed out just a second ago. So in QuantumScape, all about 1565. Let's continue along and talk about FSLY. So FSLY is what we've got here. And we're going to clear up the drawing set. Zoom in a little bit here. Very similar chart, right? If we just look at, this kind of ascending triangle that's in place, coming in with the lows. Our support trend line is much cleaner in Fastly here. But nonetheless, if we take a look at the earnings, obviously breaking down through that, big move to the downside, very likely that we open on a gap down. So where's our level is going to be? Overnight low. Forecasted open is like just a couple pennies above it. Let's actually remove that. Let's say that it's going to be a little bit higher, okay? If it does happen to open dead on the lows, then that's going to be a big tell of weakness. But if it's a little bit higher, it'll put gap rules into place. And we, of course, want to know, we want to flip tools. And then we, of course, want to know where today's low of day was, okay? So taking a look at the daily time frame chart to discuss how this may unfold, all of these people that were getting involved in the triangle, dead wrong. If we open here, roughly around 22, anything underneath 2350 becomes incredibly difficult for this stock to do something like this and try to, get anywhere close to that breakout point. So to me, fairly concerning the fact that it was such an aggressive gap down outside of this and confirming all of these people as now overhead supply, right? So that is selling pressure. If we can break back above 2350, again, I wouldn't be overly bullish here. Instead, I would just be sort of skeptical, right? Any sort of lower highs and then turnover that takes out 23 again. So let's draw that level in actually. So anything that, accepts above and then falls back down underneath, look for the overnight low, which would be roughly $21 here inside of Fastly, okay? So that's probably how I would think about this one. Again, the daily downtrend is firmly in effect, I believe. Yeah, I got to pop that back on auto. You can see that this thing has been trending lower for quite some time since November, okay? Basically, the last earnings cycle, lower. Even probably before that. Yeah, so look at this thing. It's not like it has a history of trending higher, so I would be very careful trying to pick a bottom here inside of Fastly, okay? Next up, we have MRO for Marathon. I believe that's an oil company, MRO. And zooming in. There we go. Let's see what's going on with this one. Looks like we got the number, but guidance will be just before the bell tomorrow. Usually guidance is what moves the stock, and depending on what the forecasts are, good or bad. But nonetheless, it's sort of hovering sideways close to the low of the range. So for this one, it's going to be, I don't want to say quite simple, just like Nvidia. It's a little bit different, but nonetheless, watch this, right? If I do something like that, and then do something like this, there we go. So if we open at the lows of today's session and break those lows, boom, it's a move into this day's range from Tuesday. You would expect chop back and forth in this area. Quite simple. Inverted hammer here, sellers stepping up towards the afternoon, giving us that selling pressure, obviously. That doesn't look great, right? So you would look for lower inside of this range. If we can't hold up at that level, the 2070, which you can clearly see as the breakout point, then again, that's your chop indication somewhere in here. If 2070 holds, then it's just a gap fill, right? And maybe it bounces back into today's range and then it's choppy in here. As of right now, this stock, based on what's going on with the earnings and the two candles we have in play here, it's looking like chop to me instead of clean direction and some sort of imbalance on the bell. So MRO, probably the choppy one, probably the one that you don't want to start trading aggressively one direction or another based on where we're kind of hanging out here. So that's Marathon. Next one is going to be AMAT. Applied Materials. This one is sort of, let's see what's going on here actually. Yeah, so I like this area of balance, and I like the fact that we're breaking out of it in the earnings, okay? So if I actually clear that up, there we go. Let's get rid of that. There we go. So zooming in here, bull flag, very likely that we open on some sort of gap up. Looks like we're holding higher as of right now. We want to know the overnight high. As long as we can open above this pivot zone that we had mapped out, 144 down to 140, let's just round up, call it 143. As long as we can open above that, and let me just scrunch up and remind you where that's coming from, very historic area. It even goes off further to the left, but you get the gist. Support in here, resistance. It's actually a little bit taller than the resistance that we had in this most recent balance, but nonetheless, opening above that level strikes me as being fairly bullish. As long as that happens and we can consolidate in this area, I think it establishes a day of acceptance above that level, and then from there we would look for breaks of the overnight high to take us higher. Now this level is not doing us too much good anymore. That was a historic one, but nonetheless, look left. Very, very emotional breakdown here. So I'm not saying it has to be retraced all in one day, but I am saying that there's a lack of structure there until we come up closer to some of these highs. Okay, so I'm going to split the difference between what we have in here, just giving us a rough idea of some of these targets overhead. 59, or 159 rather, 162. That would be sort of what's on the docket if we can recapture the daily 50 SMA and take out this overnight high on a momentum move off of some consolidation, something that looks like that. You can clearly see we're starting to get a bull flag. So Applied Materials actually looking pretty good for an upside move. If it breaks down, obviously, underneath this zone from the daily, which would be, let's just call it 143 again, then look for a move lower into the true breakout point from here around 141, okay? And are you really going to want to trade for that range? Probably not, at least not in my estimation. The risk reward doesn't really make sense, but that's like the area where you would want to see it, worst case scenario, pull back and do something like that. Anything under 141, probably chop back down inside of this range. You could even start thinking look above and fail. Target should be the bottom end, closer to roughly 130, right? But again, it does look more bullish than bearish here inside of Applied Materials. And then the last name we have for this earnings rundown is going to be CSCO for Cisco. Zooming in on these guys. Whoa, there we go. A little bit of glitch going on. Nonetheless, zooming in on the daily, there we go. That's looking a little bit better. We'll put in the top end of that balance, and we'll zoom in on the 30-minute to see what's going on with the earnings. Big move up, a decent amount of pullback here. So this isn't the most promising thing to see, but it's not the end of the world. Let's take out the Fibonacci's from the low up to the high just to get a sense. Look at that, 61.8 acting perfectly as support. So as long as that pullback sort of holds here, then again, we're clearly going to have a gap up, right? But if that holds, lean a little bit more bullish than bearish. However, what would the target be? Overnight high is probably on the docket here. If there's an upswing and there's good volume to support it, note also that if we can get a daily open that's above 56.31, it's the top end of this range in here, then not only did we have a look below and fail, we've achieved the top end of the range essentially, but now all of these people, whoever's left, holding on to a position, and anyone who is building a position on today's session, those people are like up massively, right? So as that starts to unfold, they're maybe even thinking to add to the position. Maybe we get some more added buying pressure there. You also get the people who are saying, oh, wow, this was a failed range to the downside, a failed downside range break. Maybe we get some more upside just because the sellers were not able to materialize, right? Anyone who is short, trying to build a short position down here, expecting terrible earnings, they're going to wake up to one heck of a surprise, right? So that's what I would start thinking about inside of Cisco in terms of levels. And just to show you where that 58 is coming from, prior breakout point right here held it on the pullback, then went for a nice little run. It's also, roughly speaking, at least, a range double to the upside, okay? So that's where 58's coming from. You can also see it was resistant in the overnight session, so an area of importance nonetheless. If it wants to open underneath 56.31, I would just be a little bit more patient for the longs and wait for, an intraday setup, a 5-minute bull flag, an ascending triangle, something of that nature. Anything that doesn't really break out and just chops around in here, look for exactly what I just said, chop, right? We're inside of this balance range. We'll likely just get some price acceptance. The real activity will take place up and over 56.31, and you'll just get back and forth action underneath that level in between 54.69. So that's going to wrap up our earnings rundown. If you like this new video format, the quick sort of fire all in one video, I suppose, instead of multiple different videos that you might have to click on or watch, let me know. Some people like the individualized videos, I know, because then they can watch the select ones that they want. But, we're going to try something new. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and we'll go back to the old method. But if it works, fantastic. So let me know down below. As always, don't forget our main channel, is linked down below in the description. And all of that being said, I wish you a green trading week.